The governing body is responsible for some of the worst crimes you can commit. Hiding dangerous users inside the congregation, lying to governments, and manipulating 8 million people into doing whatever they want, among many other things. That has gotten them close to the courts more than once, although they haven't been in danger of going to prison just yet. So what would have to happen for their luck to run out and the government deciding to arrest the governing body for their crimes? Are there any crimes that give them ground to arrest them right now? And would that mean the end of this cult as we know it? Let's find out in this episode where we explore the inevitable end of Watchtower. So, we want to arrest the governing body to bring this religion to an end. First things first, who can arrest the governing body? Well, the Jehovah's Witness cult has its headquarters in upstate New York, so the United States government would have to get involved to get them arrested. And this is the first giant hurdle we need to overcome. In the United States, religious freedom is deeply protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution, which guarantees the free exercise of religion. And the First Amendment goes a long way in protecting more dangerous religions and groups than the Jehovah's Witnesses. The Ku Klux Klan is protected by it, and so have been many other cults, including the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a Mormon cult that remained active for decades until the early 2000s and made famous by the Netflix documentary Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey. In the documentary, you see just how hard it was to bring the leaders to justice, despite being guilty of the worst child exploitation with many victims through decades. We don't have anything that big against the governing body themselves. As far as we know, the governing body do not touch children, and this religion isn't based on that kind of abuse either. The closest we have is that their policies are insufficient to properly protect children, and you will have a very hard time making a case to a jury that everyone in the governing body deserves to go to prison for it, even if I do believe that myself. That's because for the government to move forward against the governing body, public perception would have to shift first. I've talked about the issue with public perception and the Jehovah's Witnesses in this video, where I mainly talk about why people don't care about Jehovah's Witnesses. And that's what we would have to change. The public perception of Jehovah's Witnesses would have to shift from a quirky but mostly harmless Christian sect to the life-threatening cult that this religion actually is. And I have great news about this, especially if you like this arresting the governing body plan. Since I made that video, it feels like public perception has very slowly started to shift, even if it's just for a little bit. After filming that video, they very publicly got exposed being labeled as a destructive sect, with its followers as victims by a Madrid judge, which made international news. Their insufficient child protection policies also made them lose their religious registration in Norway, a country famous for its freedom of belief. And just last week, Lithuania followed through, also denying state recognition to the Lithuanian Jehovah's Witness community in the area. These are a lot of changes happening quite fast, and most important of all, they cause precedent. The more countries in Europe remove the religious status of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the more countries will rush to do the same, pressuring the United States to finally take action. And maybe, just maybe, we are already seeing the start of this in Europe, especially if more countries continue to pay attention and follow behind the steps of Norway and Lithuania. We're also seeing the rise of popularity of documentaries around cults and their victims, along with the rise of streaming services, since shows about cults usually make for engaging short series with a new focus on the increasingly popular true crime scene. With our society caring more and more about mental health, it's only a matter of time until we collectively realize that a cult enslaves minds and therefore is the most damaging kind of group when it comes to mental health. And again, we might just be seeing the start of that just now. It starts with true crime, then it moves into cults, then it moves into how cults work and how everyone can be targeted. And once we're there, the public outcry will continue pushing governments to legislate against cults, just like they've done in some European countries already. So, now we've changed public perception of the Jehovah's Witnesses and people see them for the cult that they are. That doesn't get us to arresting the governing body just yet though. For that, we'll also have to find good potential grounds to arrest the governing body. After all, leading a cult isn't illegal under any law, and as long as you can't tie directly a leader with illegal activity, you have no grounds for arresting them. Cult leaders don't get arrested for leading a cult, they get arrested for the illegal things they need to do to lead a dangerous cult. And what are those reasons? Well, some leaders get arrested for inciting violence. That's how David Koresh, the leader of the subsect of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a cult similar to the Jehovah's Witnesses, ended up arrested. Or, well, lost his life while he was getting arrested. But as you can probably tell, this is usually how the leaders of violent cults get arrested. Cults that attack a person or a place. And Jehovah's Witnesses use violence in a different way. For most of their existence, Jehovah's Witnesses have believed, like most other cults, that the world would be better off if they were the only ones living in it, and everyone else died a violent death. However, the difference between this and other cults that believe violence and genocide is the answer, is that this cult specifically believes that God is in charge of all of the violence, not them. They believe God, along with Jesus, the angels, and the angelic governing body, will genocide the whole world until only exemplary Jehovah's Witnesses are left in the Battle of Armageddon. The closest they have to inciting violence is the governing body constantly reminding people that they will be raptured into heaven right on time to participate in all that violence. However, arguing in court that Stephen Lett is threatening violence because he believes that he'll be raptured before the apocalypse to get an angel sword and kill people is probably not gonna get you anywhere in court. They could also get arrested for financial crimes, and I wouldn't be surprised if an isolationist and supremacist cult like this one is committing some sort of tax fraud by not paying their fair share, but that's just speculation, and we have nothing to base that on. Plus, as long as they retain their religious status, they would unlikely owe that much since they don't even pay taxes. We would have to remove their religious status and then wait for a while until there are proper grounds for their arrest due to tax fraud. However, many other cult leaders get arrested for CSA, and here things start becoming a little bit more promising for this plan, at least at the beginning. This religion famously has an issue hiding CSA in their congregations, whereas pretty much anyone's first instinct when hearing about CSA is reporting it to the authorities. That's not how it goes when it happens inside the religion. Jehovah's Witnesses are instructed to report to the elders about that first, so the elders can deal with the sinner. The elders will then call the local branch of Jehovah's Witnesses, and an anonymous person will check if they can get away with not reporting it to the police. We have had multiple cases when, even in areas where mandatory reporting is in place, elders are still told to not report it to the police. The elders will also never encourage Jehovah's Witnesses to report the facts to the police. They will merely tell them that that's their right, very likely with the reminder that if they report it, they will be dragging Jehovah's name through the mud, since reporting it would make the religion look bad. And that is in the best case scenario, where the elders believe the victims and do the things the way that they are supposed to. If the victim is accusing, say, a popular member of the congregation, the elders may end up just siding with the member and not the victim. And again, we have had multiple cases of the victim being forced to apologize to the person they accused, and then being disfellowshipped for being flirty or for lying. This is one of the biggest issues this religion has because, as you can probably guess, the lack of consequences for CSA makes it proliferate in the religion, with potentially tens of thousands of crimes known and carefully documented by the elders that have never been reported to the proper authorities. I speak about it in depth in this video if you want to know a little bit more about it, but I think you can agree with me that if this isn't illegal, it definitely should be. So, we got them, right? They lead a religion that tells people to do this, right? That's illegal. Let's arrest them. Well, not so fast. Even though the governing body is directly responsible for all of this, knowing that and proving that in court are two very different things. The Jehovah's Witness religion is extremely paranoid since they believe that the government will turn on them right before all the governments are destroyed by God. That's why they have a lot of fail-safes to protect the religion and the governing body specifically from the law. They have thousands of shell companies where they can bounce lawsuits around, all with similar names and a different set of properties to it. They would have an insanely hard time getting the governing body just to testify alone, as they consider that persecution of the highest order. Current members of the governing body have refused to testify by lying and by paying millions of dollars for it, like in the case of Gonzalo Campos in 2013, accused of CSA inside the religion, where the government called Garrett Losh, member of the governing body, to testify. Garrett Losh used technicalities to essentially lie to the court and make it appear like he didn't even have a relationship with the religion at all, writing a letter that stated, "I do not answer to Watchtower, and Watchtower does not have and never has had any authority over me." There's been several cases where judges fine a specific amount per every day that the religion refuses to release documents or cooperate with the investigation, and they just end up paying for it. Without a fail, this cult takes every single chance they get not to cooperate, regardless of how much they have to pay or how much they have to lie. Tracking this hiding of CSA all the way up to the governing body will be an almost impossible mountain to climb, filled with lack of cooperations, lies, technicalities, and very likely a long list of fall guys all the way up to the governing body helpers. Unless they themselves can be directly tied to either CSA or its cover-up, maybe in a memo sent by the governing body instructing it, arresting them for their CSA crimes will be almost impossible. But the governing body hurts people in more than one way. If we can't get them for hurting people through their secretive CSA cover-ups, we can probably get them for their inhumane anti-blood doctrine. Whereas almost nobody knows that this religion covers up CSA, everybody knows that Jehovah's Witnesses do not get blood transfusions. And this might end up being our most promising and straightforward grounds for arresting the governing body. Originally, when I was reading and researching for this video, I thought that something would have to happen for the governing body to be liable for the blood prohibition. But the more I look into it, the more I get convinced that the only thing that's keeping them from prison is the lack of general awareness of the issue, aka the public perception. Jehovah's Witnesses are coerced to not receive blood transfusions by the governing body already, and that is already very illegal. Whenever a Jehovah's Witness is hospitalized, the elders have to be informed. The elders then ask whether or not the blood issue will show up. If it doesn't, then the elders may just use the information to inform the congregation that one of their members is in the hospital. If the member is going to get surgery or something like that, they're immediately assigned to a member of the hospital liaison committee, an elder likely from a different congregation and who doesn't even know the sick person. Their job is simple: to make sure the sick person does not get a blood transfusion. Every Jehovah's Witness is supposed to carry a no blood card on their wallets at all times, where they express their lack of consent to receiving a blood transfusion. The elder's job is to make sure they honor that little contract. The elder, who likely has no more medical knowledge than the one he was able to half read on the way there, will go as far as to get a power of attorney to ensure the Jehovah's Witness does not receive blood transfusions even when they cannot consent, will push family members who are telling the sick to get a blood transfusion away, and will be the most vocal supporter of the witness's right to die before getting a blood transfusion. Obviously, the Jehovah's Witness can tell the elder member of the hospital liaison committee to go away at any moment, but that would be a big faux pas in their religion. Doing so would indicate that the witness is considering getting a blood transfusion and values their life more than their beliefs, a big no-no in the cult. Because if the Jehovah's Witness ends up accepting a blood transfusion unrepentantly, then they would automatically be kicked out of the religion, which would force everyone, family and friends included, to immediately shun them. And while direct family members might help take care of the sick person, there would be no social network to help out or to even provide simple social visits. And that's not the only way that a Jehovah's Witness is coerced to not accept blood transfusions. They're also lied to during their whole lives, with the governing body producing content reminding Jehovah's Witnesses of how icky blood transfusions are anyway, how much more clean they are for not accepting blood transfusion, and making blood transfusions sound like an archaic practice that is dangerous and easily replaceable, instead of the unique life-saving treatment it is. A Jehovah's Witness is, on one hand, lied to all of their life into hating blood transfusions, and threatened with ultimate shunning from everyone they know during their hardest times if they decide to accept a blood transfusion anyway. And everything that I just described about how the blood prohibition works in this cult is highly illegal. You are not supposed to do any of that to anyone, especially when they're children, because, did I forget to mention, that's the most illegal part. That the blood prohibition also involves children, even those who haven't gotten baptized and committed to the religion. Parents will also face shunning if they're Jehovah's Witnesses who allow their kids to get a blood transfusion. When I had appendicitis surgery, I was 9 years old. I hadn't gotten baptized and knew that my parents had instructed my surgeon to not give me a blood transfusion under any circumstance. I remember them asking me before their surgery how I would defend myself if someone wanted to give me a blood transfusion behind their backs. I knew the drill. I wasn't going to let anyone give me a blood transfusion. After all, if I died for not getting one, I would get immediately resurrected into paradise to play with pandas. I wasn't afraid. I was a fully radicalized child. And that is very illegal. That's why this religion has to lie to its followers in multiple ways, like gaslighting them into believing it's their own choice to not reject blood or to accept blood, overblowing the risks of blood transfusions and making them feel like they know more than doctors. And that's why they're extremely careful when talking about the children who die from lack of blood transfusions. These children will always be portrayed as having the maturity of adults, because that is the only way a child can reject life-saving treatment, to have them legally recognized as consenting adults. The story will always focus on how much the kid apparently did not want to get a blood transfusion and wanted to die instead, and how much more mature they were for it. You will never hear the countless stories of children who simply didn't have a choice because their parents refused a blood transfusion while the kids were out. These things happen all the time, of course, but the religion will never admit to it because it is illegal. In fact, researching for this video, I realized that we have pretty much no video of the governing body directly talking about the blood prohibition, and I don't think that's a coincidence. They have talked about everything from definition of words, well, actually mostly just definition of words, to ridiculous generations teachings, but we are yet to see any governing body directly condemn blood transfusions. Instead, when they talk about those, it's always about how good it is that Jehovah's Witnesses have the help of the elders to ensure treatment is the way they expect, and that's it.
In a northern Canadian city, she had been very, very seriously injured. She had to be airlifted to a larger center where she would be able to receive more intensive care. A hospital liaison committee member was immediately notified. He went to the hospital. And so as soon as the aircraft landed and the sister was being taken off and wheeled into the hospital, there the brother was waiting in the hallway. And so when he approached her, lying on this stretcher, the sister was trembling with fear. Well, when he looked down at her, she looked up and she said, "Are you a doctor?" And he said, "No, I'm your brother." Well, immediately the sister, this huge sigh of relief, because now there was someone who could give her the practical help that she so much needed.
I think we have it. The best reason to arrest the governing body is their blood prohibition. All you need is to change public perception first and put a little bit of pressure on the governing body until they pop and talk about it on video. And once that happens, any condemnation of blood treatment would not be hard to persecute. As soon as someone from the governing body condemns blood, we have grounds to arrest them due to child endangerment and even for manslaughter if enough ex-JWs join a public suit against the governing body for their lost relatives. And we can just keep arresting them as I talk about the blood prohibition, or arrest all of them at once if the government determines that the governing body is directly responsible for the blood prohibition, and it is. Finally, we arrested the governing body. It wasn't even that hard, and it's with illegal stuff they're literally doing right now that can easily be traced back to them. So, what now? Did their religion end? Did we win? Well, not exactly. Look, forget about the Jehovah's Witnesses for a bit, and let me just show you this. This is La Luz del Mundo Church, another fundamentalist Christian cult. The leader, Nason Joaquin Garcia, got arrested in 2019 for CSA and many other similar crimes and has been in prison since. It's been 4 years, almost to the date, and this footage is from last year. The church is still active and filled with virtually the same amount of followers. Nason is still leading his church even from prison, sending messages to his followers. The cult is still going, with no signs of stopping anytime soon just because their leader is in prison. And I believe that is exactly what would happen if the governing body got arrested. The last time that the leaders of this religion got arrested, they literally interpreted that as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy and adapted it into the doctrine to validate it. In fact, it almost seems like the governing body has been priming its followers into believing that they are predicting they will be arrested, almost as if they're preparing them not to lose their faith on them when that happens.
Or suppose that someone is convicted and put in jail. Well, that would apply to our young brothers in Korea, wouldn't it? They were convicted and jailed, and what was their crime? They refused to kill someone? Did they do anything wrong? Or someone is found guilty by men, as Jesus was. It doesn't mean that he's guilty in the sight of God.
If the governing body got arrested, they would immediately seize the opportunity to validate the persecution complex that's been a key part of this cult for over 100 years. They would claim this validates their religion as the only one true religion, compare the governing body to Paul being arrested, and would ignite passion into their followers, believing now it's more important than ever to support their religion and obey it in everything. I can easily see the governing body even using that opportunity to declare that the Great Tribulation has started, a short period of suffering right before the end of the world. And just like almost every time they proclaimed the end of the world, they would use the momentum to grow and expand and validate their doctrines. I believe that the governing body getting arrested like this would probably lead to one last hurrah where they would predict the end of the world again, reinvigorating the religion and reinventing it in the process. Whether this cult survives the governing body getting arrested would depend on their response, and although it could definitely lead to the fall of this religion, it can also very easily not change anything or even reinvigorate the religion, radicalizing it further and forcing it to finally adapt to the modern times. So, what are the chances of this happening? Well, let's divide it into two. First, what are the chances of the governing body getting arrested during our lifetimes? I believe there's probably a 40% chance of that happening, which is Far more than I expected when I started this video, let me tell you, but it's still kinda low. After all, while their blood doctrine is definitely illegal, the tolerance that they've historically gotten from it makes me doubt the United States government would actually persecute the leaders. What's more, the leaders of the Jehovah's Witnesses are also historically cowards, lying to people in and out of their religion to avoid answering for their crimes. Even if they face government pressure, they're quite likely to just change the doctrine and proclaim to the government that they never knew that it was harmful and that they didn't make the rules just to avoid prison time. Now, what are the chances of this ending the religion? About 15%? This religion has already had its leaders in prison before, and just like almost any cult with leaders who go to prison, they still keep going. Arresting the governing body just by itself would have more chances of radicalizing and reinvigorating the religion than of ending it. But let me know below, do you agree with this? And what is your theory for the end of this cult? If you have a good one, I might make a video about it, so subscribe if you don't want to miss the next time I explore how this cult is going to end. Thank you so much to my supporters, especially these peeps are right here. I had a really bad medical emergency like a couple of weeks ago almost, and I had to get hospitalized and get like some meds and studies, and I was only able to pay for everything I needed because I had just received money from Patreon. So thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot, and it really goes a long way.